Hi, everyone. I'm Alessandra, Programs Director at Planet of Focus. And today, for our third installment of the 2023 Eco Film Lab program, we are welcoming Isaac King, who is a very talented animator and filmmaker. We have had the pleasure of screening his films at our festival over the years. So, welcome, Isaac, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, why don't we get started with the very, very basics, because the Eco Film Lab is for elementary and high school students to tell their own environmental stories. So, what inspired you to become a filmmaker and an animator?
Hmm, that's a really good question. That's really at the nut of everything that I'm
Please.
trying to think about and do. So, I started my career as a filmmaker with a really strong passion for art of all kinds. So, I was always drawing and making things as a kid, and that led to my education at art school. I went to an art school in Vancouver, and in art school, I discovered animation. I kind of knew about it before, but in our school at Emily Carr, I found that animation was the art form for me that really combined all of the art forms that I wanted to do. So I could do drawing, I could do sculpture, I could do photography. It was really all there. And within animation, I could tell the stories that I really wanted to tell. And they started with really silly stories about a character walking or doing an action. And then eventually I built on that process and used animation to tell much longer, more involved stories that kind of over time I realized my main passion was environmental filmmaking or ecological filmmaking, and that's what I'm using animation for today.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that some of your films have such a silly factor to them. It's so playful and whimsical. We've screened a few of your films at the fest over the years, as I mentioned, and they're always so fun and find a way, as you say, to tie in ecology to the film, but also a lot of times technology and that kind of the human and nature relationship. So, how do you come up with your stories? Like, if I was a student, how would I know where to find my story?
Mm, yes. All of my ideas just come from observing the world. So I think a big thing that I do is I always keep a sketchbook. I've got one right here.
Perfect.
And in my sketchbooks I record ideas. It's like this kind of thing. It's like drawings, and it's kind of like a journal and a diary, and I just draw things that I see and ideas that I have, and I just kind of keep track of them all in my book so that I can flip through there and come up with ideas. And then eventually I see something that excites me or interests me and I want to make it into something bigger. And that's usually how the stories begin. And sometimes they're really simple. They're like a person walking, carrying something, and then, oh, that reminds me of another thing, or that looks like a mountain or a tree or a face. And then I'll start making something with that, and then that will turn into a bigger story. And yeah, it's hard to know where ideas come from, but just keeping a keen eye of the world and a visual sense and a sense of fun too, I think is key.
So would you say it's fair to say that rather than traditional documentary filmmaking, maybe you start out with a script? With animation, you'd start out with a sketch, or you get inspired by something that's obviously more visual.
Definitely. For me, I'm inspired by visuals, but I'm also inspired by ideas or something that's really seems strange to me or bizarre. So, for example, I think about an issue that's really weighing on my mind, like why are so many people staring at their screens in a time when like real world is more exciting and interesting than ever, and like there's so much stuff about nature that really fascinates me and my children, and that's kind of what led to Whatever Tree. And I just looked around and I saw everyone was looking at their phones, and I know phones are fascinating and you can do so much on them, but I just could not believe how in every situation in life, and this still happens today, it's like the screen addiction is really permeating culture. And I thought, how can I examine that in a fun and interesting way?
Mm. I love Whatever Tree, and it was such perfect timing, right? Like right at the beginning of the pandemic, and
Yeah.
we were all locked inside, and the only way you could experience nature for a long time was on your screen. So how do you stay connected to nature, especially as a filmmaker, when the truth is you're going to be editing on a screen and showing your work on a screen? You still keep that connection to nature.
Hmm. Well, that's kind of an irony, is that I'm working in a screen-based media, right?
Mhm.
This film is going to be seen on phones and on computers and in cinemas, and so I'm very aware of the screen and all of its associations and limitations. But it's also really exciting. It's the only place that I can make drawings move, or in stop motion make things appear to move. And so I'm totally committed to animation. I think it's a thing that encompasses all of my other ideas, like I said before. But I do think that before I make animation, I really have to be present with the natural world, or with a phenomenon or an animal or a plant that really I find fascinating. And
Mhm.
so I think it's about just being curious. And if you're curious in the world around you, the people, the stuff, the machines, whatever it is, look closely, try and record and research as much as you can, and then convert that into a story that's interesting for you, first of all, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with it. And I found if it's interesting enough to you, it probably will be interesting to other people too.
You mentioned taking the time to convert it to a story. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. So we know that stop motion can be very time consuming. On average, how much time does it take, would you say, for you to create and record one scene?
Yeah, that really depends on the style of animation. So if I'm making a simple stop motion scene with a piece of clay, and I've just got my camera set up and I'm moving the clay around like a little inchworm, maybe moving across the scene, that's really fast to do a scene. That'll be, I don't know, a couple minutes up to a couple hours to just take those photographs. However, for more complex scenes with characters that are interacting or talking or moving, that can be, I mean, many hours of shooting for a few seconds of animation. And then if there's some post effects, that can take longer. So, really about the process, I would say. For whatever tree, that was a very complicated process. I had to animate things with some drawings first, and then I would take those drawings, trace them, cut them out of paper, and then position them in real environments. So it was kind of like a double repeating version of animation, which I don't recommend for beginning animators. But the more you get into animation, the more you'll see
Mhm.
potential or new ways of filmmaking.
Let's talk about translating the work to beginners. And do you have any pro tips on how to start out the most simplified version of stop motion? Where to begin?
Yes. The the first thing I tell everybody who I'm trying to talk about animation with, my students at OCAD or my kids or anybody who will listen, is you're it's about the movement. Okay, so it's about the design and the movement and how those two things interact. So whatever you have, if it's an object, a character, a rock, a brick, a piece of wood, however you move that is very important. And the way you move it is going to affect how smooth it looks and what that thing can do. So if you're trying to tell a story, the movement is so important. If you're taking a picture over here and then another one here, it's going to be very jerky and fast, and
Mhm.
people won't be able to follow your story. So practice, 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 and set yourself up with a camera, even on your phone, and just like a simple app that can take a series of pictures. And once you have the motion and you understand how to move things, or even how to keep things still and talk in place, or move to some music, whatever it is, you can focus on your theme. And your theme is what your story is about. So maybe you want to do a story about a plant that's growing and the life cycle of that plant, or one day in the life of an ant, or it's about how people are getting around in the city. Are they riding bikes? Are they taking transit? Are they driving their car? Think about what that theme is, and I would say really focus on it, and try not to overcomplicate your story with a lot of details. because that happens a lot. You're making a story about a character who's going to work, and you decide, oh, I want to make this character have a big hat and a funny cape and some boots, and suddenly people might be distracted by that and think, well, what? Who is this character and where are they going? So just focus on what your story is and how to move things, and build it up from there.
Keep it simple. I like that.
That's the core. And one other thing is, as you go along, if you can, show it to someone. Show it to your parents, your friends, your siblings, and say, "Do you understand what I'm doing here? Does this look like what I think it looks like?"
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's
'Cause you have
important.
the vision in your head, but you don't always know if that translates to the audience. So it's always good to
Exactly.
get a second pair of eyes for sure. On that note, a lot of our Ecofilm Lab students will likely be working in small groups. So do you work mostly alone? And if not, then how do you divide up the roles?
Yes. Uh, there's a lot of there's a lot of roles in filmmaking, right? And the bigger the production, the more different teams and people that are working on things. I do tend to work alone because I have a very specialized practice at this point, but I always need collaborators. So people to help me carry things, or to take pictures of things, or to help design things or move things. So um, I like to be involved with the story and the design and the animation, but in terms of like the sound, I usually get help from a composer or a sound mixer. That's kind of the biggest part, and of course, other effects. If I wanted to do some 3D animation, which I don't really know anything about, I would need to work with someone. But um, it's I would recommend for beginners to try and understand a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
because that's the best way to be a director. If you know how to make some sound and some designs and some animation, you will be able to speak to all of the people that you might be working with and say, we're going to need a sound like this, and this is how long it should take, because you have some experience in that. So it's better to try at the beginning to understand a little bit about the whole process.
I love that you mentioned the sound because I think that's often overlooked, especially with beginner filmmakers. But at the same time, it's 50% of what your audience is experiencing is, you
Mhm.
have the visual, you have the audio. So I love
Mhm.
that your films often speak for themselves and there isn't much dialogue. And I think also with short films and some student films that we've seen, there's often a misconception that it's only 4 minutes, so we have to cram as much info in as possible.
Mhm.
What are some ways that you prefer to tell a story without using a ton of dialogue? Is it sound effects, music, title cards, even?
Yeah, dialogue is not really my favorite for those reasons. I mean, you have to
Hmm.
translate it. It gets complicated. I think music is great. If you can make music, that's the best. If you know someone that can make music, if you can find it from the internet from like a royalty-free source, if you have permission to use it, that's really important. Um, but I would say try and listen to the music first and see if that gives you any ideas, because too often people are making the whole story and then they just try and jam in the sounds at the end. And as you say, it's too much. It's like there's a background, I mean, sound can be really helpful, but it can also be very distracting. So use the right sounds that sound good, that seem to fit. And sometimes you need sound before your visuals. So if you are thinking about an idea, you might start to listen to music before you start your animation, actually. And if you start to listen to music that you like and say, oh, this has a really great beat, I want to use this, you can use that to animate. And suddenly your film will really move well, because you've syncopated the rhythm of the animation to the music. So
I love that.
one thing. And the other thing is, uh, sound effects super important, and they can really help to drive the action. So if you have a character kicking a soccer ball, maybe, and while you're animating it, it doesn't quite work out, and the foot doesn't quite hit it, and it looks a little bit weird. If you add the sound effect of a kick at that moment, you're really selling that action to the audience, and suddenly it really looks like that character is kicking the soccer ball.
Yeah, it can really be the glue that kind of holds it all together or makes it all come together. I love the idea of picking the music first. I haven't heard that, and it makes so much sense, especially with animation. So
Mhm.
let's go back to the mixed media element. And I know it's a little more complicated, but I especially loved in Whatever Tree how there was an animated character, there's some live footage in the park. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of mixing media and kind of the making of Whatever Tree?
Mhm. Yes. Well, as I mentioned, Whatever Tree came out of this time when I was thinking about people addicted to phones. And I say addicted very loosely because phones are a tool. Obviously, we all need them and they're helpful. But if we're spending all our time on phones and not experiencing the real world around us, we're really missing out, I think. So I wanted to reignite the passion for the natural world, and I really feel like humans are part of nature. Humans and nature are together in ecology, and we're not over here and nature's over there. So I wanted to, in all of my work, I find that I'm trying to find where the humans are within nature. And so I thought, where are the connections and how can we make these connections more visible? So animation is a great tool because I was very aware of how these dead trees, wilderness trees, they're called, are really host to tons of life. So uh, there's bees laying eggs in there. There's decaying critters that are breaking down the bark. There's new plants that are growing inside. There's fungus. There's all kinds of stuff that these old rotting trees are giving to the forest and to the environment, and it's largely unseen because it's inside a tree. So then I started to think, well, maybe I should make this kind of scientific expose of the layers of ecology. But then I realized I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. This is also very dry information. I want to make that interesting and entertaining to people.
Yes.
So in the film, you'll see there's little cutaways of the tree where we see all the things happening in there, right? There's little grubs and woodpeckers eating them and all of the various connections. And I wanted to tie that into humans that are really kind of separate from that in an urban setting. So people that are on their phones, that are really obsessed with social media, and there's also a character who is interested in social media. This is the woman who wants to share her wildlife photography, but no one's liking it, and that's kind of bumming her out. And so she's also involved in this very human desire to be happy and to have like connections with other humans. So it's about an influencer and this kind of older woman who's kind of new to social media and how they connect through this Whatever Tree, which happens to look like a shruggy emoji.
Right.
And so the idea really came together through a bunch of different ideas that I had cobbled together. But the technique, as your original question was really about, here, I actually have a bunch of the things. So these are some of the characters. This is a person on his phone. Here's another person, and they're just paper cutouts of people. You can see they're very flat and they're very simple to make. They're just cardboard and some sticks that I stuck in the ground, and they go from large size to what I mean. I have so many of these things, but they get right down to this size. This is one of the smallest little props. This is the little the bobblehead of the tree, and in between you get things like this. And I was so interested in how the flatness of paper and drawing, which I
I,
love to do, can kind of overlap with real objects.
oh,
So here, this is like a squirrel, and it's eating this pine cone, or it's a spruce cone maybe, but the cone can actually turn, and the head of this thing was being replaced, so it would be like I would change the head out, and so that was just very interesting to me, the flat and the real.
I love that. I love that. You're animating the animation.
Yeah, a little bit. And here's another example of Logan. I call this character Logan, and he's walking on his phone, and you can see that these are all like different positions of him, and on the back is just like wire and paper, very very simple.
Yeah. It seems
And there,
it seems like a lot of fun.
it is a lot of fun. And so making the characters out of paper meant not only was it easy and cheap to make the characters,
Right.
but I didn't have to make the backgrounds because I decided when I put them out in a park or in front of a tree or the sky, I didn't want to design all that. I just wanted to use the real sky and tree. And that had its own challenges because the weather was sometimes bad, or it would be raining or cloudy, or you'd see too many cars that would throw off the scale. So it
Mm.
took a lot of experimentation. And I think in some of the materials I'll share with you, you can see all of that process. Like I actually had to grow a field of grass on my roof at one point to make it look like the smaller set. It's pretty interesting.
Wow. Oh, that's so
Mhm.
exciting. Um,
So I was gardening and I was working with wood and paper, and I love that. Yeah.
Now, that sounds like a ton of fun. And I love that you also tie the science into it in a fun way. One of the
Hmm.
not so fun elements of filmmaking, or I shouldn't say not so fun, but more complicated, is editing. So I know
Mm,
with a documentary film, or especially a wildlife film, there's hours and hours of footage before you get to cut it down. Is it the
right.
same with animation? Did you have a hard time cutting down whatever tree, or is it storyboarded so you kind of know exactly what you're going to do?
I always aim for the latter, which is you want to plan things as much as possible.
Hmm.
Because unlike live action editing, if you have to cut scenes, it's extremely painful in animation because you've spent all this time animating. So as much as possible, I plan it out with a storyboard, and then I edit a little bit and I trim, but I really try not to like cut whole scenes. So if you can plan it out, and that's where the storyboard really helps, as well as the animatic, which is the
Hmm.
stage after the storyboard, where you make your storyboard move with some sounds. And that kind of gives you a rough version of what the film will look like before you make the film.
That's excellent. Planning ahead is a huge element of this type of
Definitely.
filmmaking.
Hmm.
Um, Something that is kind of new, especially at Planet of Focus, is the idea of pairing an installation with a film. So I know one of your newest films, In Betweening Beings, is also an installation, and we're so lucky to be able to include it at the fest this upcoming October. So can you tell us a little bit about pairing a live action experience, really getting the audience to be able to dive into the film that way?
Hmm. Thank you for asking about this. This is kind of coming out of my newest research and exploration into filmmaking, which is like I've been making films for many years, and I realized they show in the cinemas and online to a select group of people. And I thought, how can I show it to maybe not more people, but just a different group of people in an art gallery or outdoors? Or how can I share what I'm interested in with just through another means of communication? So the installation is a way to just kind of share things without a single screen. I'm not really telling you where to look. Within
Right.
Between Beings, this was my MFA project, and it has about 5 different projectors, and they're all kind of pointing in different directions, and they're also hidden. So it's kind of fun for you to walk around a space, try to find out where the projectors are, where the speakers are, how they're being projected, where they're going to go next, what the story you're supposed to be figuring out. It's kind of like a puzzle, really.
Mhm.
And so I witnessed people walking through a gallery saying, "Oh, what's over here? Oh, and now the projections are on me, and now I'm making a shadow, and now if I move here, this is happening." It's like kind of an interactive thing, and it's also part of this idea of including humans within nature. So the things being projected are more of my animations about species or animals or plants, and finding out how humans are affecting it in the idea of the Anthropocene, or are humans kind of causing a lot of damage, or can they be helpful? And a lot of my work really tries to show the damages of our age, but also provide a bit of hope. I think that's where animation and just the flicker of film and color and humor can inspire people, because so many there are so many options and films and opportunities to really be depressed and sad about the state of the world. So I'm trying to counter that with a little bit of hope and joy.
Love that. I love it. There needs to be a playful nature to it all as well.
Hmm.
And it's so funny because it's like an added layer of experience, the installation paired with the film, kind of like
Hmm.
experiencing some of the whatever tree characters just now, and the squirrel,
Hmm.
pine cone, with in betweening beings. You're watching this film, you see the little, worm kind of squirms on
Hmm.
the screen, but then you're part of the installation and you kind of feel like you are the worm that's being watched or looking at these large signs. So it's just another added layer of understanding hope and
Yes.
adventure and whatever that piece is going to mean to you. So I love the secondary kind of concept that pairs in. And
Right.
I would love to see some of our Eco Film Lab students kind of pair
Yeah.
an experience with it. We've had, butterfly garden films, or yeah, all sorts of planting
Yeah.
and school garden things like that, that would make for such a great complimentary event if the students want to kind of
Yeah.
pursue that as
I
well.
mean, I think that animation filmmaking does not have to be limited to the screen. Like that's kind of the traditional thing we're used to seeing. But I found that with projectors, you can really project anywhere on any surface. And what does it mean when your animation is projected onto the leaves of a tree or onto the stones of a walkway? I mean,
Mm,
suddenly the textures of that material are affecting your own work. And it does make it much more temporal. Like at what time is it going to be there? It has to be during nighttime, usually when it's a little bit darker. And how are people moving through the space? It's just a more engaging space. And I think also after the pandemic, people are looking for more moments of connection in real life. And that's another benefit of the installation, I think.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, there might be some students involved in the program who want to continue maybe pursuing filmmaking, maybe specifically animation. What advice would you give them?
Um, I would say, I mean, just, yeah, go for it. Just explore and create. And I really believe that animation is a medium that has no limits and you can do anything in. And if you have an idea, find a way to make it happen.
Mhm.
Ask around, share your ideas, uh, ask for help, and then and just kind of take things as far as you can. And I mean, materials should never be a limitation. That sometimes the technology can be a limitation because you don't have the fanciest computer or camera or whatever it is, but you don't need that kind of stuff because with really simple technology, a phone, a laptop, you can edit the footage. And I mean, the materials are like all around you, like papers or natural materials or found things are the best because then you don't have to use new stuff and then throw it away. That's a big part of my work is like reusing materials. So I would say just kind of get out there and yeah, yeah, go for it.
I'll start with a sketchbook. Certainly,
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
that's all you need.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's a great place to end.
Okay.
Apart from Planet in Focus this October, where can everyone find your work?
Everything is on my website, isaacking.net, and that's ISAACKING.net. And I'm on Instagram. I post some things there. Yeah, and I've just got a whole bunch of things coming up. I've got a retrospective coming up at a festival in Baltimore called the Sweaty Eyeballs Festival in October. That's at the beginning of October. But I've got a few different things happening, and I'm also teaching animation at OCAD. So um, that's kind of what I'm up to these days.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well,
Mhm.
thanks, Isaac. And best of luck to all of our students on finishing up your films.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.